In this lecture, let's look at how we can achieve filtering in our ASP.NET Core Web API. Filtering is a common requirement in ASP.NET Core Web API applications where clients want to retrieve only a subset of data from the server based on a certain criteria. Let's look at an example. In this example, we have a data for a few countries. We have United States, United Kingdom, New Zealand, India, South Sudan, and South Africa. If we were to implement filtering on our web API, and the client wanted to filter by the results based on the query United, then from the data that we have, the data that we filter was basically United States and United Kingdom. So we are giving a subset of back to the client based on the data that we have and the filter that the client has applied. In our solution, we also want to filter by name of the walk or the region, and we also want to supply a filter query on which we want to filter the results. So let's come back to the API and implement filtering. We are back inside our solution and we want to implement filtering on the walks that we have. So if you followed the previous lecture, we have around 15 walks and we want to filter that data based on the query that the client is telling us. So the first point of contact is the controller. So let's add some query strings on the controller. So let's open the walks controller here. And if we come down, the filter would apply to the get all walks controller method. So the filtering, sorting, and pagination happens on the get method, and this is the only method that we are going to target and change. So this is the get all method. We want to get a few query strings which are query parameters inside the URL over here when the method is called. So let's say we want to get two things. The first one is from query because it's coming from the query string in the URL. So the URL which we have at the moment is API/walks. And after that, the query parameter would look like this. We'll have a question mark. The first query parameter that we want to receive is the filter on query parameter, and the filter on would basically say what column do you want me to filter on. And if you see the result, we have these columns. So I don't want the result to be filtered on ID. That is useless. We have the name, description, length, and image. I don't think the image is ever filtered on as well. So really you are left with name and description. And if you want, you can later on implement length. But in this example, we are going to use name because that's the most commonly used, or it will be the most commonly used filter. So let's put the name over here. So filter on is equal to name, and that's the value that we will get inside the parameter over here. So let's create this parameter. This will be of type string, a nullable string, because not always do you want to filter on results. So in that case, we will have it as a nullable. And after that, we will have the name of the parameter, which is filter on. Now, once we have decided which column to filter on, now we want to receive the query that the user wants to filter on. So after that, we will have an and the next query parameter will be filter query. And that will be, let's say it is a word called track. And the user wants to filter all the results with track in it, with the name track in it. So now I will have a second parameter, and that will be also from query, which will be a nullable string as well. And the name will be filter query. And with these two parameters, I will have inputs from Swagger or any client, and I will pass this to the repository so that I can filter my results when I am retrieving data from the database. So we would have to make changes to the repository. So let's open the repository folder, and I will open the iWalk repository because I want to change the interface. This is the method that we are working on, which is the method to get all the walks back. So I will add two parameters. One will be a nullable string of filter on, and that will be by default a null. And the second one is a nullable string, and the name of the parameter is filter query, and that will also be a default of null. And the same thing, because we have changed the definition of the interface, we will have to change the implementation as well. So for that, I will open the SQL walk repository, and I can minimize all of this, and because we want to work in this method, I will add these two parameters in this method as well. So I can minimize that for now. So I have added to the get all async method, I've added the same parameters as I have defined in the interface. So now that we have the parameters, let's use these parameters to filter the results that we want from the database. To do that, we will have to make a few changes to how we are returning the information over here. We can't just return the information from here because we are setting up our solution to later on work with sorting and pagination as well. So we will change the structure of this line to something different. So I will comment this out for now so that we can still have it over here. The first thing we will do is to retrieve the walks as queryable. So a variable called walks is equal to, and I will use the same code from here. So not the await, but the db context dot walks dot include difficulty and include region. So I will copy this highlighted code and paste it over here, and I will use the as queryable method. And if I hover over walks now, this becomes a I queryable of type walk instead of a list. So at the moment I have a I queryable which I can use to apply filtering and sorting, and finally when I'm done I will return the awaited result of walks dot to list async. So like that. So I've broken this query of code, a line of code, into two separate things because I want to apply sorting and filtering and pagination in between these two lines. So the first thing we want to do is to apply filtering or filter. So now we have to filter based on the column which is coming from here and the query which is coming from here. So first of all, we will check if the filter on parameter and this is not null. So I'll say if string dot is null or white space, and I will check the first parameter which is filter on. If this is false and string dot is null or white space, the second parameter is false, that means both of these results are not null or not white space, then it will enter over here. And now I can filter using this column and the query. So now I will say walks is equal to walks dot where. I will use the where clause and x such that now I want to check if the filter on was on which column. So before I can actually use the where clause, I have to check if is it on the name column, or is it on the difficulty description column, or is it on the length column. So I will say if the filter on dot equals the equals method, if this is equal to the name, because we will only implement the name filtering in this API, and later on you can use the same technique to implement it in the length if you want to. And we will say if the filter on is on the name attribute, or if it's string comparison is, let's ignore the case as well, so that no matter name is on the uppercase or lowercase or a mixed case, we want to ignore that. If it's name, then we want to use this query. So let's take it inside the if loop over here. So walks will then become a where x such that x dot name dot contains the filter query. So basically we are saying if, and I want another round bracket over here. So we are saying if name contains any of the results that we are passing, then we want a filtered result inside this variable. So let's say if this initial result was 15 records, and based on this query, if I only get 5 records from the database, then this result becomes 5 records, and we are returning the 5 records back to the caller. So based on this change, let's go back and let's test this. So I will run my application. So Swagger is running as normal, and because we made the changes in the walks endpoint, we will come to the walks endpoint and I will expand on the get all walks method. And here we can see 2 new query parameters, and it says query over here. So these are query parameters. If I want to try it out, and because these are nullable, you don't have to send anything in here. Let's see what happens if I click on the execute button. If I scroll down, I get the result back, and these are 15 results, and it's the same number as I have in the database over here. So I have 15 records, and these are 15 records here as well. So now let's apply a filter on, and I need a column name, and the column name is name itself. So let's say name, and let's filter this by, let's say, garden, or let's say walk, and see how many results come back. Let's filter on the walk, and if I execute this, I now have received a few results, and these are plenty, so maybe every name has walk. But let's say if I say park, can we have a smaller subset so that it's easier for our eyes to count as well? So if I say, so we are still getting the same result back. So it's now time to debug the application to see what happened, because we are sending the filter on as name and filter query as park. So let's put a big breakpoint over here in the SQL walk repository. And if I execute this now, the first parameter coming as is the filter on, which is coming as null, and also this as null. So that means we aren't really passing anything. And if I open the controller here, we are not passing the result to the repository. So I have to stop the application, because we added the result to the repository, the new code, but we didn't pass the query parameters to this repository, and that's why none of the filtering was happening. So with that change, let's start our application again, and this time we should see the subset result. So Swagger is running again. I'll come to the walks endpoint and get all the walks back. So I should see a big list of 15 results. I have this breakpoint over here. Filter should be null, and this should also be null. So let me just continue with this and let the result come back. So I have a result, again a big list, as you can see from this scroll bar over here. But now let's say I filter on the name column and say the keyword beach. So let's say I add the beach keyword here and execute, and it comes over here. Let me press continue, because I'm pretty sure it should only get one result back. And if you see now, the result is a filtered response. So we were missing the passing the query parameters to the repository, but once we did that, we can now see a filtered response as a result, and you can see the URL as well. So these are the 2 query parameters that we are passing inside our URL, and the controller method is actually reading this and filtering the results. So if you see, if I just clear this out and say execute, we have the breakpoint over here. So let me remove the breakpoint and press continue. So again, I get all the results back, and let's say this time I say Mount Victoria. So I should get this walk back, and if I execute it, I get the Mount Victoria loop result back from the database. So with that, we have finished the filtering implementation, and on a similar approach, you can also add the filter to description if you like, but that is totally up to you. In the next lecture, we will move to sorting, and we will see how we can use the order by and order by descending methods and sort the results.